Hello, Lizzie here, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Tabitha. It's a really big table runner, or it could be a bed throw, or it could go back on the back of a sofa. It's 28 by 62 approximately, depending on whether we're generous or sort of slacking on our seam allowances. You know what it's like with the 1/4 inch, which is what we use throughout. So this is what the pattern will look like. It's a PDF pattern. You get full pictures and written instructions on how to make it, plus this tutorial. Now I'm going to show you just one of the blocks today, but everything that I do is the same for the larger version. You just have to increase the blocks. In this case it's 3 blocks. Now if I show you actually what Tabitha looks like, it's massive. It's massive. So this is this is Tabitha. Like I say, she's big. She's got stipple quilting on. Now don't be worried about that. If you can't do stipple quilting, then just do your regular stitch in the ditch, or maybe you're going to do strip piecing, you know, strip stitching, something easy like that if you're not sure about stipple quilting, because it's obviously free motion and not everybody loves that. So I've got all my pieces ready to cut out. Everything is in the instructions on how to cut all these pieces out, so I'm now good to go. These are all my borders and my edges as well, so my binding, and these are the pieces that I need to make that first block up. So I'm going to put them in order over here so I don't get confused. So I'm going to start off straight away with the small square in the center, and like I say, all the dimensions are on the pattern and the instructions as well. So with white fabric, and this has a little pattern on it, just make sure you do get the right side. It's easy to get that confused. So the first one we're going to stitch on is the matching square, so that's absolutely the same size, and try and stick to your 1/4 inch if you can. It just changes the dimensions of things if you do a little bit less or a little bit more. Now I'm not going to do a back stitch, there's really no need. And then once you've stitched that one, just make sure you finger press that seam allowance out towards that darker fabric there. You don't want that seam allowance showing on the white square. So then you're going to pick up the next size. So we've got 2 shorter pieces. Again, the dimensions are all in the PDF pattern. And again, just stitch that first one on. Now I'm using directional fabric, which you could obviously think about and get all the pictures or whatever it is going all the same way, but I'm not too worried about that, because this is going to be like a small coffee table cover, and of course it doesn't matter which angle the pattern is, because you can then have it from any angle. So I'm just finger pressing those seams open, and then I'm getting the second shorter piece, putting that over the top, obviously right sides together, and just stitching along. Now I've got it on a fairly shortish stitch, it's 2.5. You could go down to 2 if you wanted to, but I find 2.5 just right. And again, just finger press that. And I'm doing it on the top of my machine. You'd probably be as best to take it to one side and just finger press that seam open. Make sure that when you look at the back that the seams are going out, so it doesn't show on the white fabric. And then the last piece in this round, this is quite pretty fabric. I'll put what the fabric is in the description box below, in case you're interested in this particular one. And this piece then goes all the way across. So it's pretty standard. It's a bit like a log cabin, isn't it, where you're just going in the round. And then of course what you should do now is to take this to the iron and give that a really good press. It really does make a difference, and to be honest, I would be pressing at every single stage, you know, ironing a dry iron, not steam, just to make sure that's sitting beautifully. So that's our first round. We now have to do the second round. Now I'm going to start where we started with that square that matches that middle square, that's my first round. So placing that on my desk, let's get the next set of pieces in. Because what you've got is one short length, two the same, and then a longer length on all rounds. So if you lay them out on your desk or wherever you are, then you'll be able to see the different sizes and not get confused. Right, so this is the first one, the shorter length, and I'm going to go across where that first square was I started. So we're just going to do exactly the same, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you'll find the measurements I've given for the fabric is for the full size table runner. And you might think that as you're cutting the strips, it's quite wasteful, but each cut you make, you'll find that the piece left over will fit the next block. So there's our first piece done, and again, I would now start taking this to your iron and pressing this really well, just so those seams lay flat. There we go. So now we're going to go to the next shorter piece and put the second piece on. Again, right sides together. Just get those edges lined up. Now, even though this is 100% cotton, quilting cotton that I'm using fabric-wise, I'm just using my regular polyester Quilting thread. A lot of people would say you should use cotton with cotton. Gosh, I must admit I'm not that precious. So next we're going to put the third one on, and this is really such a lovely, it's a really quick make actually. The only part where you might, if you haven't done a lot of quilting before, and like I say, is the stipple effect of the quilting. Right to the end. Now don't worry if your fabric doesn't quite meet up, you know, your seam allowances may have changed throughout if you're stitching this together. Just trim it to size when we get right to the end, that'll be fine. And again, just make sure that seam allowance goes facing out. And like I say, I'm finger pressing mine, but you'll take it to the iron. And then this is our last piece to go on. And then we get to the technical bit, but we'll do that in a second. So this is our last strip. This is such a great design, even though I'll say so myself, because of the size of the strips. It's quite a quick make. There we go. Right, so that's our last piece. So I'm going to take this away and give it a good press so it's nice and flat. But there's the beginnings of our fabulous table cover or our coffee table throw, whatever you want to use it for. It could actually be a nice big cushion, but we still haven't finished. We need to now, I'm going to press this, we need to now put these little corners on, and you may wonder where on earth they go. Well, I'm just going to go away and do the pressing, then I'll come back and tell you all about that. So I've pressed my block so far. I've got my cutting mat underneath here. I've got my rotary cutter ready, and I've got a 12-inch square, actually it's 12.5-inch square ruler. You could use your regular 6x12 ruler or your 6x24, but I find it easier with a big ruler. That's entirely up to you. So this next stage is to actually cut our corners off. Okay. So I've actually placed my block now on point. So if I move that back, you'll be able to see that we've got it on point. It doesn't matter which point is here or wherever, as long as you've turned it on point. Now this is the center white square that we started. This is our first round. This is our second round. Now we need to cut these corners off all the way around. Okay, now the best way I can describe this, actually the instructions on the PDF pattern are brilliant because it's very clear, but you're aiming to get the line of your ruler going through the points of your pieces here, and it needs to come out 1/4 inch from this second block here, this second round, or the corner of the first round, but you're going on to the second round, if that makes any sense. And you're going to cut on that 1/4 inch line. So where that end point is there, you want to put your ruler so you've got that 1/4 inch, because that's your seam allowance there. So if I place my ruler over the top, it gives me a 1/4 inch line, which is handy. Now I've got the 6 directly over the top of my point there, and I'm making sure that the line goes through all of the points on the actual quilt top itself, so it's all absolutely square and parallel. It's at 1/4 inch away from that point there, so all I'm going to do is cut. And that's our first piece cut off. So then we're going to turn our top around, and we're going to do exactly the same again. So turn it so it's on point to you. Line your 6 inches up, so that 6 inches goes right into that point there and follows all the points across your design, and it's out by 1/4 inch. And again, I'm just going to cut. Now don't think this is wasteful, because all of these pieces could be used on another project. I mean, they could be pieced together and make a little pouch or a bag, so don't worry about that. Sometimes with patchwork there is a lot of waste, but the end result is so worth it. So again, I've got my 1/4 inch line there. I'm just lining up my 6 inch line, going all through those points, and I'm going to cut again right across. And the last one now, just turn it, and you can see the sort of shape we're getting. Again, 1/4 inch, making sure it goes through all of the points, and then I know it's completely parallel and square. And again, just cut. Let's put the safety blade back on. So there's our scrap pieces, which we can use for another project. I'll pop it down there for the moment. Okay, so the next thing to do is to actually put our corners on, and we'll come back to that now. So now we've got our funny shape going on here. If I hold it up, you'll be able to see hopefully that those corners are chopped off. So now it's just a case of getting your little pieces. Again, the instructions are in the pattern pieces there. So you've got 4 little pieces to go on each corner. So all you're going to do there, and I'll bring my pins in for this, you could use your quilting clips. So I'm right sides together, and I'm going straight over the top of my little cut off piece. I'll pin it and then I'll show it to you. That'll be the best way. So if I show you here what that looks like, so literally it's going straight across that corner there, and if I take that away, you'll be able to see how I got to that. So there's my little corner piece there, beautiful fabric. So all I've done is place that across, and you'll have a 1/4 inch overhanging each end. There we go, pin that again, and all you're going to do is stitch right across there. Okay, so I'm going to do that with all 4 corners. So I'll just pin it just for ease, but I'm not keen on pins, I must admit. So just line that up, and I still keep using them. I do like quilting clips better. So we'll pin these. And the last one there, and then you're literally going to stitch a 1/4 inch all the way across. Just make sure that each end has that overhang. Don't try to match up the edges, because they won't match up. So I'm just going to bring my machine in and just stitch those 4 corners. And again, I'm not going to back stitch, because this is all going to be included in other seams. keep to your 1/4 inch seam allowance if you can. Again, this third one now. Okay, the last one. Always looks a bit odd. So there's your 4 corners placed on there. So now what I'm going to do is actually go away and give those a little press, and I'll come back and show you how to cut those corners. So I'll give them a nice press, and you can see now what that looks like, but obviously we've got to cut those corners off. It's going to look a bit weird otherwise. So I've got my little tiny ruler here, and it's just a case of getting that ruler so it's parallel along this edge here, so it's all sitting parallel, and you're just going to literally follow the line and cut that piece of green off. And again, if you want to save those little pieces for a project, then by all means do that. So instead of cutting off that, turning and cutting that next one, I'm just going to follow my way across the little block here. It just makes it easier. Again, follow your lines. You could use your 90-degree line on your ruler to make sure it's all lined up. You could use your 12.5 inch ruler to really square it up, but I find this perfectly satisfactory. It's one of those things where you have to decide if this is the right way for you, and then you can adapt. I've been making patchwork things for gosh, about 40 years, and I've found my own way of doing things, and you'll do the same. So I'll do these 4, and then all I need to do is to turn it and continue round and cut the other 4. I'll just do this last one. So that's 4 of the little triangles cut off, and I'll just hold that up so you can see. So you can see that I've cut off, a bit like a windmill, I've cut it off going the right way. So now I can turn it and start cutting up here. So I'll go ahead and do that, and you take a look at this. You can find access to my Gold Club from my website. Sign up and you can connect to my Facebook Live events and join in all the fun my Gold Club members have on a weekly basis. And of course you get free patterns. See my Gold Club video on YouTube for more information. So I've cut all my corners so it's all lovely and squared up now, and this actually is the block before you put the borders on. So I'm just going to carry on making this with the borders, doing all the stipple quilting and doing the binding as well. If you want to make the table runner, you want to make 3 of these and join them together, and let me show you the original one. So you can see where those corners are. So the corners we've just cut are here, and you're going to join those 2 blocks together, and you can see how that pattern works there. So that's your 3 blocks in Tabitha. But just to keep this more simple for you guys and for me, I'm going to create it using this just 1 block. So the next thing to do is to put the borders on. Again, all the measurements are in the instructions. Now you could, if you wanted to do your mitre corners, but I find it much more easier just to square off our corners as we go. I've cut my pieces to size. So I'm actually going to, because again it's white fabrics, making sure we get it on the right way. Now I'm just going to offer these up and snip. Now you could cut this to size and be far more accurate than me, but this is all done so it's easy for you guys to actually follow it. So this is a selvage to selvage length. And again, it's never any waste. That's going down in my little pile there. So we're going to stitch top and bottom. Now obviously there's no top or bottom, but you're doing opposite sides. So if I lay my borders out there, this is the first border, so I'm laying that out on there, and I'm just going to stitch that across and just trim it to size, and then I'll put the side pieces on. and obviously they're going to be a little bit longer because we've added these 2 borders. So again, it's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure it's right sides together. Be aware that some of these pieces now are on the bias, so just be aware of, it's not, you don't want to stretch them basically. Again, I'm not going to back stitch because this will all be caught into another seam. So that's one done. Again, make sure we've got the right side of this fabric down. It's beautiful fabric, so hard to see which side is the right side. But it's worth checking. Lovely. So there's our first 2 pieces down, and of course you're going to finger press these or take it to the iron. Again, those seams can go out. We've got white here, so it's entirely up to you whether they go out or in. Probably better to go in, to be fair, but if you're using a different coloured fabric, then they go out. So there's our pieces there. So now we're going to stitch all the way along with our second pieces. So I'm just going to trim these up. Now you might want to press and get your rotary cutter on this and ruler and make sure this is cut correctly. I'm just going to do this by eye for you guys, but sometimes it's better to get your ruler on this. There we go. So I'll get my second pieces. So again, I'm just going to offer these up, take them that little further over than I would do normally, give that a cut, and again this last bit should easily go across there. So again, right sides together. So I start a little way off, make sure that's all squared up. This is where it makes a difference if you have used your rotary cutter and ruler. And the purists might be shouting at the screen. Perfect. And the other one, yeah. So this is our last round of the first lot of border. There's the second one, and then we bind. Well, we're going to quilt first, then bind. Lovely. So again, I'll just trim those ends. And again, probably best to press and then get your ruler. That 12.5 inch square ruler is perfect for this. And the last one here. trim that away. Lovely. Okay, so I'm going to go away and press that, make sure it's really lovely and smooth. You can see how it's coming along. And then I've got the really bright coloured zingy border to put on, and that's that little bit wider. So I'm going to just press this and I'll come back to you straight away. Okay, giving that a good press. Good iron, dry iron of course. So now we're ready to put the next border on, which is the wider border, and that's the last stage before we start quilting and putting the binding on. So we're not far off finishing this really. So I've cut, now I'm going selvage to selvage again. So with the white, 2 strips, selvage to selvage was perfectly adequate. For this next stage, it's 3 strips going from selvage to selvage, and the first strip will go across top and bottom, opposite sides again. So I'm just going to offer it up. Obviously we've got selvage here, white selvage, so I want to make sure I don't show that in my seam. So I'll make sure that that hangs over the edge. And again, it's just the same as we did before, so 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the opposite side. Now you may find if you're using fat quarters or a different width of fabric, this is a regular quilting cotton, about 44 inches, that you'll need to piece this together. So we've got our 2 opposite sides on now. Now because this is quite a long piece, it's I'm going to use my rotary cutter and ruler, so I'll just bring that up, and it's just a much more accurate cut. So I'll use my small one again. Oh, here we are. With the smaller border, for me that was fine to cut by eye, but with this one, so I'm going to keep it still flat. So I haven't brought that over and finger pressed it. I'm going to keep it flat, and I'm just going to trim it so it's parallel to my white piece. Let's make sure that's off, and then I'm going to trim. So I know that's absolutely perfect. The other end was fine. Again, with the other end on this side, keep it folded back. Use your white as your guide, keep it parallel, and again just cut that end off just a smidge. I think we're all right the other end as well. Yeah. So now we need to add, see how big this is becoming now. So now we need to add the opposite sides again. So there's our piece so far. Looking really pretty. Love the fresh greens and the pops of yellows. So I've got 2 strips this time, selvage to selvage. It is too long, but you'll find that all of these scraps that you have can be used for other projects. And again, with this one, we are making the smaller version of the table runner or bed throw. So just coming up to the end now. So we've got that waist to cut off, but I'll do that with my ruler and rotary cutter. So just turning this round for the opposite side again. And of course, if you want to, you can measure and get these exact measurements of your border as you go. That's entirely up to you. I'm always looking for a quicker way. So again, I'm just lining this up, making sure I haven't included the selvage. So again, I've just lined up the fabrics again. I'm just making sure the selvage is off where I'm starting to stitch. And again, just make sure those seams are going out as you come up to them. So we're nearly completing this seam now. And then it's the fun part of the quilting. So there we are. So that's all the borders done. So we've just got to trim these pieces off, which I'll do now with my rotary cutter and my little ruler. And just as we did before, we're just going to use our edges of our borders, which I know you'll have cut accurately, as our guide. So we're placing the ruler parallel to the outside of that seam and just trimming away. And you might want to do this in sort of stages. And again, just make sure everything is flat, everything is nicely pressed, if you like, finger pressed, or use your iron. And again, just trim away. Like I say, nothing is wasted because you can use that on another project. Keep turning that around. So it's quite a big project, even though we haven't made the whole thing. It's a good size. Again, the last one coming up now. Turn it that way, make it easier. And again, you can see how those seams go out now. All of those seams go out. So it'll need a final iron before we go on to the next stage. There we go, lovely. Got a little pile of scraps down there now I can use for another project. It's such a pretty fabric, I think I probably will make a little bag or something. Okay, so that's our final piece done. That's now ready for quilting. I do need to iron these borders. Doesn't that look glorious? I love it. Really bright and cheery. It's going to look great on a picnic table, won't it? So I've prepared my back already, and I'm going to just talk through the next little bit that I'm going to do. With the backing, I'm using the same white quilting fabric on the back, and I've got a beautiful fleece lining, so it's a wadding, a batting. Mine is like an 80-20, but you could use anything that you want to use. There's no rules. You can use a polyester if you want to. You can use, I sometimes like to use bamboo or soya if it's going to be really thin and cozy for a baby. So that's all prepared. So all you need to do is then to adhere your top to your wadding, because obviously we've got the wadding already attached to the backing. And I use a spray adhesive to do that. You'll have your favourite. Please, Google that to make sure that you find one that's suitable for you. I'm not here to promote other people's products, so I use one that I'm familiar with, and you'll do the same. So look, all I'm doing is smoothing this down. Like I said, ideally I would have ironed this, but just for speed, so we can have a look at this next bit, I'm just sort of getting those creases out, getting this to lie nice and flat. Now the The wadding and the backing I cut to 32 inches square. I found that to be absolutely perfect for this. And I will iron this before I quilt it. So what you're going to do now is, because we've already got the backing spray adhesive to the wadding or the batting, we just need to do the same with our top. So I'm going to go away and press my top so it's lovely and square, and then all I'm going to use is a spray. And actually all I do is I bring my top back, I spray my wadding, I never spray my fabric. I then lay this down over the top and smooth it out. You spend 10-15 minutes smoothing it out, because when you go to do the quilting you want this to be absolutely flat and perfect back and front. So then the next stage, I will bring this across, spray the wadding, the batting, and put my top over it and smooth it down. And then we're ready for the quilting, and I'm going to take you through how to do that next. So I've pressed my piece now, so it's all ready for quilting. I think it looks absolutely super. Now, of course, you could, I'm going to do stipple quilting and I'll just talk you through how I do it. But you could, because this is very geometric, you could actually sort of stitch in the ditch and quilt it that way, or you could do echo quilting around your shapes and just do some really basic quilting. You don't have to do anything fancy. It's just a case of getting the 3 layers to go together beautifully. And once we've done that, then we're ready for putting the binding on and we're done. Now, how I attack this, if you like, is I always have a tester piece ready, because doing stipple quilting, going into it cold, you're not loosened up enough, you're not relaxed enough. So some people say you should do exercises with pens and getting your curves and getting that movement, but I do it straight onto some scrap fabrics, which is what I've got here. Now, to set my machine up, and yours will be similar to this, you're going to drop the feed dogs down. I've got a button on the side, you might have one at the back, a slider. Look for that if you can. It's not imperative, but it's nice if you can do it. I'm going to take my regular 1/4 inch foot off my machine and put my embroidery foot on. It's a darning foot or an embroidery foot, and it's perfect for free motion quilting. So if I can get that on there. Stitch length, stitch width, all of that goes out the window when we're free motioning, so don't worry about stitch length or stitch width. Just a case of dropping those feed dogs. Now, I do like to use a slider sheet. That's optional as well, and it's just something so it allows the fabric on top to move really smoothly. So I'm just going to get my thread back up again, because I've just covered it with my slider sheet. Now, this slider sheet isn't the best. It could do with a wipe. If you look, mine's moving. If yours is moving like that, then give it a wipe over with a damp cloth, and that will actually reset that stickiness, if you like, on the back. I also like to use quilting gloves as well. Again, purely optional. Look, I'm not a professional quilter. I do this as a hobby and I do this for fun, but there are some things that quilters, professional quilters use that I've adopted, which are the quilting gloves. They've got like little silicone fingers, if you like, which hold onto your fabric beautifully, like the slider. It's something that they would use, and it's something that I've adopted as a hobbyist. So the first thing we need to do is pop our scrap fabric under there, if you want to go that far, and just get that relaxed feeling. You can bring your thread up to the top by just putting needle down, needle up, and bringing your thread up, but I like to just stitch a little bit on the spot just to anchor those threads down, and then I always move away from my thread. I don't go back on myself. You should theoretically start in the middle of your project, but with stipple quilting I start at the edge. Call me a rebel. So then it's just a case of relaxing and just moving your fabric around. And don't worry about your stitch length at this point. All you want to do is master this technique of moving your fabric, and it's very free flowing. So my hands are very lightly on the fabric. I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling, I'm just allowing the movement of the machine. Now, I do find it easier to go a little bit faster, and at first you'll probably want to go really slow. I totally get that. But for really a good stipple quilt, if you go a little bit faster, move your fabric as fast as I'm doing, just not too fast. You're not tugging, you're not pulling. If you do tug or pull, you could easily break a needle, and that's because you're not going fast enough and you're tugging your fabric. So just allow it to be. So I'm happy with that, I'm relaxed. I hope you are as well. So now look, I haven't changed my threads, okay? I'm a bit of a rebel when it comes to things like this. Now let me show you the back of that because it's easier to see. So that's just that little bit that I've just done, and that's the sort of thing you'll be aiming for. I haven't changed my threads at all. Again, like I said, I'm a bit of a rebel when it comes to things like that. But of course there are quilting threads you can use, things like Aurifil, look up that. You could use a bobbin fill, which is a very thin sort of filament sort of thread, which won't show very much on the back in a colour wise. In my original quilt, I've used bright yellow thread on the top because I felt that I'm looking, because it's over there, it really complemented the fabric. And I suppose I could use green on here, but I'm going to stick with what I've already got in the machine. And you know what, if this is the first time you've ever done this, just please do that on a little tester piece before you go ahead and buy really expensive threads and all that sort of thing. So I'm starting right in this corner here. Now this size piece will take me probably about an hour to stipple quilt. So I'm going to start off, and then you can come back a little bit later and join me just as I finish. You don't want to watch this for an hour. So I'm again doing exactly what I did before. Now, like I said, you can bring your thread up, and a lot of people will say that's what you should do. You do whatever's comfortable for you. I'm afraid that my rule book has gone way out the window many years ago. So you just decide what's best for you. So look, you can bring that thread up. I'm trying to do this properly for you. And it's the same with any free motion. So you've got control, I suppose, of your threads. But I still go on the spot just a couple of times just to anchor that thread down and knot that thread. And again, just get those threads out of the way. We don't want trailing them all over the quilt. So here we go. Let's start. I'm going to move that just slightly more towards me. And then just be brave. Like I said, go a little bit faster than you think you should or you feel controlled. Don't forget, you are moving the fabric. It's under complete control with you, which may be a little bit daunting, but don't let it daunt you. I love this sort of quilting. Don't worry about your stitch length either. You'll probably find naturally there's some places where you'll just go on the spot like this. You'll get stuck and you'll go on the spot. But if you have a needle down position, put the needle down, regroup, start again. That gives you a breathing point. So look, I'm going to go ahead and finish all of this. You've seen the gist of what I'm doing. So join me in a couple of minutes. So just coming up to the final corner now. I'll tell you what I did do, and I should have told you, is I went to the middle and then turned my work and then went from the middle out. So at no time was I did have a lot of bulk anywhere underneath the throat of my machine. I mean, some machines will take large quantities of quilt, but this is only a small throat, so I did half and then I turned my work, and it doesn't make any difference because you're using a swirly motion, and it's almost like it also reminds me of a jigsaw puzzle. You're doing those sort of lovely funny shapes. Right, just coming up to this final corner now. I don't go off the edge. I don't get too hung up about things like that. I just kind of make sure that it's as finished off as I would like it to be, and I think that's absolutely fab. So that's the whole thing quilted now. So if I hold it up, you'll be able to see what that looks like, and I'll show you the back as well. Hold on, we're still attached. There we go. I'll show you the back as well. Oop, there we go. So you might be able to see some of that. If I waft it about, you'll perhaps catch the light on that and see some of that, what it'll look like. I mean, everybody's is going to be different. But like I say, you don't have to do this sort of spirelli design. You don't really have to do that at all. So I'll just get rid of all my bits and bobs, take my quilting foot off, or my embroidery foot I should say, put my regular foot back on again, because the next stage is doing the binding. So let me get this out of the way. So the first thing you need to do, and actually if I remember, I thought it was going to take me an hour. It didn't. I think it took me half an hour. So that wasn't too long, was it? But you still wouldn't have wanted to sat with me and watched it. So the next thing to do is actually square this up, because you know that the backing and the wadding is much, much bigger than the quilt top. So all I'm going to do is get my mat up and my rotary cutter and just square that up with my ruler. Let's have a look, see if I can find my rotary cutter. Oh, here we are, this will do. And I've got a 12-inch ruler, that'll be fine. So I'm going to make my way along here, and all I'm going to do is line my ruler up with the side, you know, the top part, not the wadding or anything like that. And I want it really lovely and square. When you're quilting, it tends to ruffle it up a little bit, and sometimes it will little go out of shape, so you just need to make sure that that's nice and square there. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. So I've trimmed it all up. I've now got the perfect edge ready for my binding. So I'm just going to pop that away a moment. Now I've already pre-cut some binding strips. So these are 2.5 and they are selvage to selvage, and I've cut 3 pieces. So the first thing to do is to join them, and I thought it was really important that you saw how I did it. Everybody's different, of course, but this is probably the easiest way. I've already pressed them in half, that's just to save a bit of time in a moment. So get one piece, get another piece, and do this at a 90-degree angle to each other. So if I'll pin this so you can see, and then I'll hold it up and you can see what I've done. You don't have to press this in half before you do this. I've just done that to save me time now when I'm showing you. But look, all you're going to do is this 90 degree. So you've put one strip directly over the top of another. You've overhung by about 1/4 inch thereabouts either side. But you're going now on a diagonal stitch across from corner to corner. It's something that you do once, you get it, and then you carry on, and obviously you're going to do more. Let's put the feed dogs up. I've got it on a regular stitch, so about 2.5, and I'm going diagonally across. So it's right sides together. I'm not doing a back stitch. So that's what that looks like. Okay, and I've gone, like I say, diagonally across from there to there, across those 2 points there. And I'm just going to trim that away. And it just gives us a lovely mitered join. Now, the idea of a mitered join is it almost becomes invisible. If you were to do a straight edge to straight edge join, for whatever reason, it's almost like a full stop. You can see that join. Whereas with a miter join, it kind of blurs it a little bit. So it's a good thing to sort of have a little go at. So again, I'm just lining those up, 90 degrees. I'm not doing a back stitch, straight across. Now, of course, you could pin this, use your quilting clips. You could draw that straight line in if you're at all worried about how straight you're going to stitch. But it's only a little piece, so I think you'll be fine. I'm just cutting my tails off as well. So just to help this a little bit along, I'm going to iron those pieces where I joined. I'm going to flatten them. Now you could open that seam up if you want to, and then just fold them again so you've got that nice crease. Now some people don't iron their binding. Again, that's a personal thing, isn't it? I like to iron it. I'm a bit of an iron freak, if you like. I tend to iron everything. I think it comes from my dressmaking days, where of course you had to iron absolutely every single thing that you did, and so I've kind of continued doing that throughout my life. So I've got my 3 pieces joined up now. So right sides together, So I start, let's find an end. I start about, I don't know, 6-7 inches down from the top of the binding, so about here, and I'll pin it so you can see. You can use quilting clips again. I never ever start at the corners. I always start, not, well, I suppose about 1/3 of the way down, but a good 12 inches from that top corner. So if I turn that around so you can see it. So there's my binding. There's my binding here. There's my quilt, obviously, and I'm going to start stitching here. And all this is being kept loose. And as we come to the end, you'll realise why I've kept that loose. Now, there are lots of different ways of binding a quilt. This is probably the one where you're going to, if you haven't done quilting before and you haven't done binding before, it could be that the mitre corner might cause you problems. And there are other ways of doing binding, like I say. And I will cover that at some point. So 1/4 inch seam allowance, like I say, right sides together. So I'll just go down to the first corner and then I'll come back on myself and you can come back and join me. Now again, I would, I never do it myself, but I would suggest a walking foot, because you've got the multiple layers of your binding and your quilt. Your quilt should be fairly stable now you've quilted it, but you might still want to use a walking foot. They are absolutely super. I'm getting a bit of a rebel and I don't. I talk the talk and don't do it. Right, I'm coming just up to the corner now, and I'm going to stop 1/4 inch away from my corner. Okay, 1/4 inch from the edge. So I'm going to lift my foot up, turn my quilt, make sure I don't knock anything off, and I'm just going to twist my binding so it's it kind of makes it's a fold along the top. I'm going to take my needle out, actually, just pull that out a bit. I'm going to make a fold with my binding. I'm going to fold it, I'm going to put a clip on it, and then I'm going to show you what that looks like. Let's find a clip, because a pin, especially when you're stitching, let me just do that again. It's getting that 45 degree, it's getting that all lined up beautifully that will help you get that perfect mitre corner. It's not difficult, it's just practice, practice, practice. It's like everything else. So I'm going to try and lift this up. It's still attached to my machine, but hopefully you'll be able to see that that's how I've folded it. So I've just folded it back on itself, and the fold is parallel to the raw edge, like that, and all I've done is clip that just to hold it in place. So now all I'm going to do is pop my needle back in again about 1/4 inch in. I've pulled these threads out too far, but you're not going to do that. 1/4 inch in, and then I just start again, and that's the same process for every corner. So I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to come back to this start point here, and I'll show you how I finish off my binding. Right, I've been all the way around and I've come back to where I started. Let's just get a few bits out of the way. So I did my corner like I showed you just before, and I've stitched about 2 inches from that corner and I've got a nice long tail, and this is the tail that I started with. Now the trick to this is to overlap these two tails by 2.5 inches. Okay, because my binding is 2.5 inches, that's the clue. So we just lay one over the other, cut one of these. Let's cut this one to about there. There's no maths to this at the minute. I'm just trimming that so I've got a nice edge. So this needs to now go over, this one here needs to lay over the top of this 2.5 inches over. So I'm laying it on top, and I'll do this with a pen so you can see. I'm finding where the edge of my under binding is, just putting my tool on here, my ruler, and I'm just going to measure up 2.5 inches, which is here. So I'll draw a line. I wouldn't normally. I'll draw a line, there we go. So let me hold this up. So hopefully you'll be able to see. There's my 2.5 inch line there that I drew. And underneath that is the fabric, and it's overlapping by 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to cut it. Don't be frightened. Cut it. So now they're overlapping by 2.5. So when you think about this now, we're going to do exactly what we did with the binding. And that's we're going to do our 90 degree to join those together. Still overlap by a little bit. So you're bringing those two tails up, right sides together, unfold them if you can. And they will fight you because there's two short ends. You can make them longer if you want. And just overlap them. Like I say, don't forget that 1/4 inch. And I'm going to put a pin in just to hold that there. And there we are. So it's overlapping, and it's going to fight you, and it's more difficult. It's more difficult for me to show you than it is for you to do it. And then, just as your binding you did before, you're going to stitch diagonally. Let me hold this. That's better. You're going to stitch diagonally from here to here, and that's going to give you the perfect mitre binding meet join. So I'm going to pop that under my machine. And like I say, if you find leaving a longer tail more convenient for you, then please do that. There's no rules here. So again, pop it under the machine. No need to do a back stitch because all of these seams are going to get caught when you stitch it all together. Get it all lined up and go diagonally across. And of course, like again, you can draw that line if you're not feeling confident. Draw that line. So what that means is that when we get our binding flattened down, it's absolutely perfect. Obviously, you want to trim that just as we did before, because it's a bit bulky. And I would give that another press. And like I said, you can open those seams up if you want. I know some quilters, professional quilters, who always open up their seams and press them. That's perfectly fine. There's no, like I say, there's no rules. You do whatever's comfortable for you, whatever you feel right. So just trim those threads off there. I'll just get my iron in. There we go. Give it a shot of steam if you want. And there we are. Look how beautifully flat that is lying on your quilt top. So I'm just going to stitch from here to here now just to join that up. And the next stage is probably my favourite bit of the whole thing. It may not be your favourite bit, so I'll talk to you about options. So right across, join up. Just, I wouldn't do a back stitch, I wouldn't bother. I'd just go over the top of your original stitching, and obviously you're going to trim your threads. Just make it nice and neat. I think, have I got them all? There we go. So my favourite bit now is the hand stitching. And like I say, you may hate that bit. So all you're going to do is take that top of that binding and take it over to the back of your quilt. So you get that lovely finish, and you're going to hand stitch, or you could machine stitch this down. And I know a lot of quilters that machine it down because it's quicker. So you're just going to take it to the back, fold it over. You can give it a press if you want, pin it, use your quilt clips, machine it, or hand stitch it. But there we are, it's done. All these corners just poke out and fold. Look at that. You've got the perfect corner with all of those mitre corners that you've made as you've gone around. But that is our fabulous Tabitha, done in a smaller size, which actually I'm totally in love with. All I need to do now is go away and do a little bit of hand stitching. Maybe a cup of coffee and a biscuit will go with that. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, if you're interested in the pattern, please download it from my website, and I'll see you all again shortly. Bye.